Hello, my friend. It is so good to have you here today. I want you to imagine something. You are 20 years old. You are lying on a bench in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. The floor is cold. The lights are always on. People walk past you and look away. You have no home. You have no money. You have no plan. You work as a janitor at the airport during the day and at night. You sleep on the same benches you cleaned. You are 20 years old and you are invisible. Nobody knows your name. Nobody cares. Nobody expects anything from you. Because you are exactly what the world decided you would be. Nothing. But here is the strange part. This boy, this invisible, homeless, airport bench-sleeping boy, would go on to become one of the most famous human beings on the planet. He would win 5 NBA championships. He would become the greatest rebounder the game has ever seen. He would dye his hair every color imaginable. He would wear a wedding dress. He would have dinner with the leader of North Korea. And he would do all of it, starting from a bench in an airport. This is the story of Dennis Rodman. The story begins with an absence. Dennis Keith Rodman was born on May 13, 1961, in Trenton, New Jersey. His father's name was Philander Rodman. His father left when Dennis was 3 years old. He did not say goodbye. He simply disappeared. His mother Shirley raised Dennis and his 2 sisters alone. They moved to Dallas, Texas. They lived in a housing project called Ida May. Shirley worked. She worked constantly. She kept the lights on. She kept food on the table. But there was not much left over for anything else. Dennis grew up without attention, without direction, without anyone looking at him and saying, You are going to be something." He was shy. He was quiet. He had a stutter that made him afraid to speak in public. He had no real friends. He had no real plans. He was the kind of boy that adults simply overlooked. At school, he was invisible. On the street, he was invisible. Everywhere he went, he was simply not seen. His sisters were tall. They were athletic. They became basketball stars. Dennis watched them from the sideline. He was too small to play, too uncoordinated, too ordinary. He was cut from every team he tried out for. When he graduated from high school, he was 5 feet 11 inches tall. He had no scholarship. He had no college offers. He had no future that anyone could point to and say, "There. That is where Dennis Rodman is going." So he became a janitor. He cleaned the floors of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. Every morning, every night, he pushed the mop. He emptied the bins. He cleaned the glass, and when his shift was over, he walked to a bench in the terminal. He lay down. He closed his eyes, and he slept. For months, this was his life. An airport bench was his home. And then something happened that made no sense at all. Dennis Rodman grew, not a little, not a few centimeters. He grew 7 inches in 1 year, almost overnight. The boy who was too small for every team was suddenly 6 feet 8 inches tall. He looked down at his hands. He looked down at his feet. He did not recognize his own body. It was as if the universe had been saving something for him and had finally decided to deliver it. At 21 years old, Dennis Rodman enrolled at Cook County College in Texas. It was a small junior college. Nobody had heard of it. Nobody cared about it. But Dennis walked onto the basketball court, and something extraordinary happened. He could play. not just play. He was ferocious. He threw himself at every loose ball. He climbed over defenders for rebounds. He ran harder than anyone on the court. He did not have the most talent. He did not have the best skills. But he had something that could not be taught. He had hunger. The hunger of a boy who had been invisible his whole life. The hunger of a boy who had slept on airport benches. The hunger of a boy whose father had left when he was 3 years old. That hunger turned into rebounds, and those rebounds turned into a full scholarship to Southeastern Oklahoma State University. A small school, but a real chance. In 1986, Dennis Rodman entered the NBA draft. The Detroit Pistons selected him in the second round. 27th pick, not first-round material, not a franchise player, just a kid from a small Oklahoma school that nobody had heard of. He arrived in Detroit with nothing. No endorsement deals, no expectations, no spotlight, and that was exactly where he worked best. The Detroit Pistons of the late 1980s were called the Bad Boys. They were physical. They were aggressive. They were feared. Their coach was Chuck Daly. Chuck. Daly looked at Dennis Rodman and saw something others had missed. He saw a weapon, not a scorer, not a creator, a destroyer. Rodman was given one job: guard the best player on the other team, lock him down, make his life impossible. He did this better than anyone who had ever played the game. He guarded Magic Johnson. He guarded Larry Bird. He guarded Michael Jordan. He made all of them uncomfortable. He made all of them worky, and while he was doing this, he was also doing something else. He was becoming the greatest rebounder in the history of professional basketball. He led the NBA in rebounds for 7 consecutive seasons, 7 years in a row. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody has done it since. In 1989, the Detroit Pistons won their first NBA championship. Dennis Rodman was part of it. In 1990, they won it again. Back-to-back champions. The invisible boy from the airport bench had 2 championship rings. But the basketball was only part of the story. Because Dennis Rodman was becoming something else entirely, something the NBA had never seen. He started dyeing his hair, first blonde, then red, then blue, then every color of the rainbow. He got tattoos, dozens of them covering his arms, his chest, his neck. He got piercings, his nose, his eyebrows, his lips. He showed up to press conferences in ways that made the entire basketball world stare. He was not just an athlete anymore. He was a phenomenon. The NBA did not know what to do with him. Coaches did not know what to do with him. Teammates did not know what to do with him. But the fans loved him, because Dennis Rodman was exactly what he appeared to be. Nothing more, nothing less, just himself, completely, unapologetically. The boy who had been invisible for 20 years had made himself impossible to ignore. In 1995, Dennis Rodman joined the Chicago Bulls. He was 34 years old. Michael Jordan had just returned from baseball. Scottie Pippen was still there. Phil Jackson was the coach. And now, the most chaotic personality in basketball was joining the most disciplined team in basketball. Everyone said it would be a disaster. Phil Jackson was not worried. He had studied Dennis Rodman. He understood him in a way that most people never had. He saw through the hair. He saw through the piercings. He saw through the noise, and he saw what was underneath. A boy who had never been seen, a boy who still needed to be told, "You matter. You are important. What you do every night changes the game." Phil Jackson told him this, and Dennis Rodman believed it because it was true. What followed was something nobody expected. 3 more championships. The Chicago Bulls won 3 consecutive titles with Dennis Rodman at power forward, the most unconventional player in NBA history, on the most successful team in NBA history. During those 3 seasons, Dennis Rodman led the league in rebounds every single year. He played through injuries. He played through suspensions. He played through controversies that would have ended other careers. He showed up every night, and he did the one thing nobody else could do as well as him. He rebounded 5 championship rings total. The boy who slept on airport benches, the boy whose father never came back, the boy who graduated high school at 5'11" with no future, had 5 championship rings. But the story does not end on a basketball court, because Dennis Rodman was always more than basketball. After his career ended, he kept making headlines. He went to North Korea not once, multiple times. He met Kim Jong-un. He called him a friend. He played basketball games in Pyongyang. The whole world watched in disbelief. Politicians were confused. Journalists were confused. Everyone was confused, except Dennis, because Dennis Rodman had always lived by one rule: be exactly who you are. No matter what anyone thinks, no matter what anyone says, no matter how confused they look, just be yourself, all the way, every single day. My friend, I want you to think about something before we say goodbye. Dennis Rodman was invisible for the first 20 years of his life. His father left. His coaches cut him. His city forgot him. His country overlooked him. He slept on airport benches and nobody noticed. And then one day his body changed, and everything else changed with it. But here is the truth. His body changing was not what made him great. What made him great was what he had built on those airport benches: the hunger, the willingness to do the work nobody else wanted to do, the willingness to dive on the floor for a loose ball, to climb over a bigger man for a rebound, to guard the best player alive and refuse to back down. That was not built in a gym. That was built on a bench in an airport at 20 years old when nobody was watching. Because the truth about Dennis Rodman is that he was always exactly who he needed to be. The world just took a while to notice. And maybe tonight, my friend, the world has not noticed you yet either. Maybe you are still on your own version of that bench, invisible, overlooked, passed by. But here is what Dennis Rodman's life tells us. The bench is not the end. The bench is where you find out who you really are. When nobody is watching, when nobody is cheering, when nobody sees you, that is when the real work begins. And one day they will not be able to look away. Thank you for spending this time with me today, my friend. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment stayed with you the most. Was it the boy on the airport bench, the 7 consecutive rebounding titles, or the man who flew to North Korea and called a dictator his friend? I read every single word you write. Until next time, take care of yourself, and when the night falls, come back.